Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode on IronmanHacks. Today, I'm really happy to be speaking with Dr. Jeffry Durmer, who is a sleep expert, physician, medical doctor, as well as he worked with the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team, all about sleep. Maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you've done.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me here, first of all. It's always good to talk to a new audience, and triathlon athletes are a sort of a new audience for me in some ways, but definitely talk to a lot of distance athletes. So this is a great avenue. So my background, I'm a neurologist. That's my MD side. And I'm a neuroscientist. That's my PhD side, and worked in academics for most of my career in major universities like University of Pennsylvania, Emory University, and I actually started recognizing through my research in looking at the functions of sleep and wake in the brain of animals, that this is something that we could directly apply to humans. And there's a lot of data, and has been a lot of research over the last 100 years in the sleep and circadian neurobiology realm. So my job as an MD PhD is to take things and translate them into practice. It's the bench to bedside construct. And that's what I started doing in my academic work, looking at folks that had sleep disorders like restless leg syndrome and sleep disordered breathing, a number of conditions, but then also looking at performance and the changes in cognitive ability, as well as physical ability. And personally, as an athlete myself, I mean, I grew up as an athlete my whole life, and actually went to D1 schools on scholarships for things like rowing, and then became a more of a national team rower after college. It really appealed to me that there must be a significant physical benefit to sleep, or we wouldn't be doing it every night as a species, and all these other species that sleep. And so far, we haven't found one that doesn't, by the way, including trees, including plants. They all have what we call quiescent periods. That must be some sort of an advantage to us physically, mentally, emotionally. And so I started studying the impact of sleep loss and sleep deprivation. And lo and behold, there's wasn't much data about what the impact was on athletes in particular. And that really started my interest in that area and working with athletes. And while I was at Emory University, I had the opportunity to work with the Atlanta Falcons professional football team here in the US, and also with a number of other elite athletes in the swimming realm. My kids were all D1 swimmers, and were on national teams and things in their days, and actually realized that a lot of their problems were related to their early wake up times and going to school, and then having second practices in the afternoons and being sleep deprived. And so I worked with the coaches in the Dynamo Swim program in Atlanta, where we lived at the time, to really improve some of those metrics around sleep and wake. And lo and behold, we saw significant benefits, not just in the pool, but also in behaviors in high school kids, which was a major benefit. So it really got me interested in applying what we knew from the science into populations like athletes. And in the last few years, last 3 or 4 years now, I've been working with the U.S. Olympic team, in particular the weightlifting team that brought me in to help organize travel, but also to organize training programs that would accentuate wake-based performance drive within the brain and bodies of Olympic level athletes.
It seems that most triathletes and actually cyclists and runners, everybody loves coffee. Not everybody, but a lot of people do, especially athletes. And now, it's the one stimulant that's not a drug. I mean, it's a drug in a way, but it's appropriately, it's allowed, and it's not a doping drug, right? So it's the one thing that everybody says, if you don't take it before a race, and if you don't use it, then you're foregoing something that, it's a free speed, basically free performance. That's the thinking, right? But what's your opinion on caffeine, both in the context of how it relates to sleep, like before sleep, obviously, but also as a training stimulant, so like we have all the drinks, the gels, all this stuff that have caffeine in them that we try to take. And when you're out on the bike for 6 hours, for 8 hours, or doing a 12-hour Ironman, how much caffeine can you take in, and how does that even help you?
Yeah, I'm afraid there's going to be a suntan lotion with caffeine next. So the there probably is. Oh God, it was a bad idea. Don't take that idea and run with it. Yeah. So again, this is first off. Let's start off. What is caffeine?
Oh, by the way, I found a caffeine spray a few weeks ago.
Really? Yeah. Okay. So it's not a drug, but we have all kinds of delivery routes. I'll tell you one thing. It is a drug. Number one, it is absolutely a drug because it works in your central nervous system. And what it does is it inhibits a little chemical called adenosine. And adenosine, if you remember basic biology, is part of building DNA, right? Adenosine is the A in the ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You need ATP, right? It's like
that's a basic
mitochondria. That's your
energy source, cellular energy.
Kind of important for a triathlete, right? So, or any athlete. So adenosine is something that is part of the metabolic process. You cleave DNA, you cleave adenosine or phosphates from adenosine triphosphate to make adenosine diphosphate and monophosphate and free adenosine. That's how the process works. And so over the course of a day, adenosine accumulates in your body and your brain. Adenosine receptors, adenosine 1 and 2 receptors, live in different parts of the brain, and they detect the rising level of adenosine throughout the day, which is why it activates sleep at a certain concentration in a part of the anterior hypothalamus called the ventrolateral preoptic area, which you don't need to know about. But the idea is that your central nervous system is monitoring this metabolite. And it's sort of the homeostat in your brain. As you're building up adenosine, it turns on the sleep switch and adenosine goes back down. And the next day it does the same thing. So it's like a homeostat. It's like a thermometer or thermostat in your house. When you take caffeine, you inhibit that process. You inhibit the adenosine signal that signals sleepiness. So it has a very specific biological effect in the central nervous system that actually shuts down sleep systems, shuts down the sleep system itself. And that's why if you take caffeine, we typically drink it in the morning, right? And the reason we typically drink it in the morning is not just because it's a hot beverage that was sold to us by a Brazilian company back in the 70s. It's because the adenosine, the anti-adenosine effect of caffeine is most pronounced in the morning when you have a little adenosine hanging around, causing that little sleep inertia that you have, because everybody wakes up with a little adenosine around and you got to kind of wake yourself up to go. Well, you take that caffeine, it inhibits that adenosine, and all of a sudden you're fully awake. So it's helpful in that regard. And it has this specific biological effect. The other thing that caffeine does is it activates a part of the nervous system that you don't have much control over, the sympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. You do have some control over it. And actually, it's one of the things that a lot of athletes and yogis and folks try to do is to try to be able to activate and deactivate their autonomic nervous systems to some degree. But when you put caffeine in the mix, it throws the balance way off into the activation of sympathetic nervous system, which is also why people look at it as a pregame to their performance, because activating sympathetic nervous system is what improves oxygen utility, blood flow, all of the other things that make your physical performance better. The problem with it is that in the normal course of training, it throws you into a sympathetic charge balance as well as an awake balance that is very hard to get out of and get natural parasympathetic activation for sleep and for digestion and for a lot of the other things that you need to do. So a little caffeine in the morning, not a problem. It's going to help you with that wake response. It's part of the circadian timing as well. It activates the circadian timing response. But if you're using it all the time, you're going to see its effect first off not be as much. It'll stop working because the adenosine receptors will adjust to having caffeine around all the time. And it will also throw your system of sympathetic and parasympathetic autonomic activity off. So you'll start to lose the ability to calm yourself, which actually is far more significant in the face of athletic performance than it is to arouse yourself. That sense of fear that you get before a race. Think about that. That's what you want to be able to control. And you're losing that ability with overactive sympathetic nervous system.
Right. It's not what I've always been hearing. And I've read about the fact that, I don't know, it sounds like my understanding is not the same as what you're telling me, that you cannot build a tolerance to caffeine. That's not what you just said. Is that true?
You can build a tolerance to, yes, you can. So if you drink caffeine all the time, and our
Yeah.
truck drivers do this, by the way. I
Yeah.
also take care of truck drivers, another professional athlete that's not recognized. It's a very hard job. Truck drivers drink, 32-ounce drink,
Oh, they're huge, right?
caffeinated beverages all the time. That's just part of being on the road, right? They have to have fluids, but what they do is they caffeinate their fluids. So they're not just drinking coffee, they're drinking sodas, they're drinking energy drinks, they're drinking all this stuff with the hope that it's going to keep them awake. And all it's doing is driving their sympathetic nervous system and driving their heart and driving the things that look like wakefulness, because the adenosine system in the brain has readjusted itself to the environment of having an inhibitor in front of it constantly.
Right.
This happens all the time in other nervous system neurotransmitter systems. We see it with dopamine. So dopamine levels, if you give somebody a dopamine antagonist, which is used for things like schizophrenia and a number of mental health disorders, over the course of time, dopamine receptors downregulate. And something called tardive dyskinesia occurs, where they can't control their movements and see a lot of mouth and facial movements, and they don't get better because the dopamine system adjusted. So the adenosine system is not quite as active as the dopamine system, but it has a similar impact. And you don't want to overtrain your adenosine system by using caffeine all the time. In fact, a good buddy of mine, who actually is from, I think, your hometown in Eugene, Oregon, he's a surgeon, a buddy of mine from medical school, climber, skier, surfer, outdoor kind of guy. He's a surgeon, and he looks at surgery as a physical performance, as right. It is. It's also an intellectual performance, but he didn't use caffeine unless he intended to use the caffeine. In other words, he avoided caffeine at all other times except when he needed it or wanted it to improve his performance. And so he looked at it as a performance enhancing drug. And honestly, if used properly, it's a legal one, but you have to use it properly. If you overuse it, it will not help you. I think it's actually really important for people to realize that caffeine is something that is ubiquitous now that was not in the 1960s. It was not as ubiquitous as we have it now. And that's because it was a part of our culture that changed, and that we are replacing sleep with a chemical that helps us to avoid sleep. And the performance benefits of caffeine, and there are some, absolutely. We see it with the military. It's part of we use many different chemicals to help our military perform under high stress environments. And, one of the things that I've found to be really helpful is to tell people, try not drinking your caffeine, try not drinking alcohol, try just sleeping more, and see how your workouts feel. Not your races, your workouts. Not how well you did, not the number. How did it feel? That's right. A different thing. It's like
your perception, not your time.
Perception. Exactly. And this is something I've seen improved a lot of rowers in my day. Was our coach was like, the feel of the boat is what you're trying to get to. You're trying to replicate the feel of the boat under you. You're not trying to we're not just shooting for a time. There are definitely workouts where you're doing that. But the real work is done in order to get the feel of ease. And that's when you're fast. The feel
and the time will be the result of that later. The time is a byproduct of that.
You got it. Exactly. So if you can reduce caffeine, reduce alcohol, get the necessary time of sleep, and make sure your timing and quality are good. If you need help with quality, you certainly can talk to physicians and they'll help you with that. Sleep physicians in particular. But once you've done that, I guarantee you that how your workouts feel will change dramatically. And you'll start to think, why do I even need these things? Why am I being sold all these pre-workout stimulants? And why do I need all these gels and suntan lotions with caffeine in them? You don't. That's the thing. You really don't.
I see.
Once you learn to feel what you're doing, it changes your performance.
So
really what.
you're basically bypassing all those quick fixes and all those band-aids, and you're getting to the heart of it and really adapting how you should be. And I presume if you feel better, you can perform more, you can do more mentally and
Exactly.
psychologically and physiologically. You're in a much better state to push yourself when you're in the race and actually win that race, because you're not feeling like, oh man, this is hard, because like you
Yeah.
said, your rate of preserved exertion or your perception of it is going to be lower, and
Much
therefore your
lower.
mental, because we all know how strong the mental side is, right? And if you can push yourself,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah, it's getting back to the basic principles of how your body and brain work. I mean, if you use a lot of other things, and a lot of people sell stuff to us, right? Those are temporary, as you said, band-aids. They are not long-term strategies. And we use this stuff with military folks, and they go into combat with caffeine pills, and they go in with Provigil pills, and they go in, but that's not normal human behavior. and
Right.
and we want them to live. It's not a matter of a sport. So yeah, we pull out all the stops in those situations, but they're very temporary too.
It's like
They're
the
not.
German methamphetamine soldiers. It's
Yeah,
like, okay,
exactly.
you're going to die anyway, but we want to win the war, so just
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. So really, we can't take every situation and apply it to athletics, because you're looking at your natural body's ability and your brain's ability and your psychology to perform better each time. I would hate to hear that I did better this time because I drank caffeine.
Yeah.
That would be, I'd be depressed as an athlete to feel that my performance is related to my chemicals.
So you've given me a completely new perspective. The typical thinking with triathletes and with endurance athletes, as I'm sure you know, and what I hear and what I've heard from people I respect, people who know the sport, who know medicine even, are always saying, you have to take not you don't have to, but why wouldn't you take caffeine? Maybe in a race it's a different scenario.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't disagree with that, would you? Like, okay, you finally made it to the world champs. Take the caffeine, do whatever you have to do, and do well in the race. But in your general 9 months of training,
yeah, I'd say yes, unless it's not something you normally, unless you have good control over your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I really think that caffeine gives you a temporary boost in terms of acceleration, in terms of acuity, but it's temporary. If you're going, remember, caffeine itself has a limited window of activity in most people, especially those who use it regularly. If you use it regularly, it doesn't work that long. It doesn't have that much of an effect. If you don't use it very often, it can have up to 8 hours of an effect. And that's one of the reasons we tell people not to drink caffeine in the afternoon if they have insomnia, because it's hanging around causing problems. It's very important to look at all of these performance related techniques as adjunctive to your training. It's not part of your training. It's adjunctive. Right. You can add it and see what it does for you. It honestly, it could throw you off. It could make your heart rate too high. It could make your breathing too shallow. It could change a lot of the other physiology that you relied on from your own training. And again, it's the feel. If you've got the right feel, that's why we all have this ability to use vision and have the ability to like foresee what we're about to go into. And if you can envision that before you do it, you can manifest what you think is about to happen. It gets your body into the sense and feeling that you want to be in for the performance. And it's really not those other chemicals that you might add, whether that's caffeine, melatonin, or anything else over the counter that you think might help. It's really about getting the feel of how you should be when you're ready to perform well.
So that visualization and that sort of like rehearsal of it, which I think most athletes know about doing, right? Imagine yourself doing this, and this is perhaps much more valuable than.
Far more valuable. That's far more valuable. So is meditation and learning to utilize the parasympathetic nervous system. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if anybody knows the book Breathe by John Esther, but the idea that, deep sea divers or folks that do free diving and have the competitions that go for 4 or 5 minutes without oxygen, that's a parasympathetic activity in a sympathetic situation where you have to perform, which is sympathetic nervous system, but you need parasympathetic control of your breathing. If you think about that, the more we can start to manipulate our parasympathetic and sympathetic responses naturally, rather than with exogenous input, the better you are at performing.
Because that's who you are. That's a physiological instead of external. It's autonomously controlled, as opposed to like, hey, I just injected something and now I'm superhuman. But that's not who you are, is it?
No. If you want to blood dope and add extra oxygen carrying capacity to your body, you can do that. That's why it's
be like everyone else. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. You too can join the club. Very cool, Dr. Durmer. I really appreciate the time you've given me. I think it's extremely insightful, and I think the discussion on caffeine is something that I'm going to have to cut up as an individual video, because it's something that so many people are going to need to understand and reframe their thinking around, because it's more like, hey, caffeine's a part of who we are, but now let's look at it from a different angle and see it as
well, culturally, coffee is our the North American version of chewing coca leaves. It's it's what we do, and
Asian.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and
your wife is a Tika, right?
Else. Yeah, my wife's a Tika, so yeah.
I lived there for a few months in high school.
So, really?
The family I lived with had a huge coffee plantation in their backyard, and
that's my wife's family has coffee plants as well, and it's part of the culture. So like kids drink coffee, but it's social. It's not meant for performance. It's social. It has different meanings for different people, for sure.